Hello, I'm Bruce Stout, and this is the Maggi Immigration Report, brought to you by the SMA Law Firm and featuring Steve Maggi, Esquire. On this episode, Steve will update you on current trends in immigration law and offer advice to trusted advisors and families considering or in the process of immigration. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Bruce. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you. So tell us a little bit about your story, about how you got to be where you are, and a little bit about your firm as well.
Sure, happy to. I'm originally from Argentina. I was born there, and I came to the U.S. when I was 5. My mom was a U.S. citizen, born and raised in New York, but because of this strange quirk in the law at the time, she was not able to get me a passport directly. And so I had to go through a 9-year process to become a U.S. citizen, and that is what encouraged me and pushed me in the direction of helping other immigrants maneuver these difficult paths that they have to get to where they want to be.
So you decided very early in your life what your career path was going to be.
Well, actually, ironically, what I wanted to be first was a broadcast journalist, and that's what I studied first. And then I realized that I couldn't make the kind of impact on personal lives of people, at least I couldn't feel that impact doing what I was doing. So I decided to go into law, and then I gravitated, obviously, to immigration.
And your firm, tell us about that.
I actually started working as a corporate lawyer in Miami after graduating from Georgetown, and I decided to follow my heart, and I went back to Argentina in 2004. Since immigration law is federal, I was able to start my own firm, and so I essentially decided to help people there locally in Argentina and Uruguay and other countries in South America to move to the U.S., to start their companies, etc.
So you were living in Argentina during that period of time?
Yeah, I was there for 8 years.
Okay.
And it allowed me time to spend with my father because my mom had passed away when I was in law school.
Oh.
And I really wanted to be close to him. And then he actually passed away as well. And I decided that I'd hit my ceiling and I wanted to help people from all over the world. So I decided to come back to New York. And in 2012, I sort of restarted the firm in New York City. From scratch. So I went from being the only U.S. immigration attorney in Buenos Aires to being one of probably several thousand in the New York area.
That's quite a challenge. Tell us about how you built the firm.
Just grassroots. I looked at my LinkedIn last week and I realized that all the people that I had met and that I had connections with, I had met one by one over the course of these 7 years.
Okay.
So it's really about making connections in the international communities, allies in the consulates, and working with the chambers of commerce that are based in New York. The beauty of New York is that most countries have a chamber of commerce and a consulate there, and so there's a lot of movement. There's a lot of people that want to move to New York, and so it's really become the hub for immigration.
Now, you're in Manhattan. You also recently opened up an office in Queens.
We did. The New York office is more business focused. The idea is to work with the foreign startups and companies as well as local employers. Okay. But we realized that we had a growing number of family cases. And Queens is the heart of the immigrant world in New York. There are more than 1 million foreign-born people out of the 2 million population in Queens. And I also live in Queens. So we just set up an office in Queensboro Plaza, which is sort of the center of Queens and where all the subways go through.
Oh, sure.
And so we're really looking forward to focusing on working with people that are there, because what I realized was that there's an underserved community in New York City. There are a lot of people that are working with the wrong people. They're working with non-attorneys, and they need our help. So the family-based part of the practice is really the focus of the Queens office.
Okay. Right on the 7 line.
Right on the 7 and about 6 other lines, yeah.
Oh, okay. Tell us about the current trends in immigration.
Well, Bruce, I have to be honest with you. One of the things that I'm proud of is that I'm always honest with my clients. Okay. These are the most difficult times that we've had in terms of immigration. There's something that I call the three-headed monster. It's the 3 divisions of the immigration service, or the actual system that we have to confront every day. Right. There's Department of State, which handles the U.S. embassies and consulates. There's the CBP, which is Customs and Border Protection, which decides who comes in or who doesn't come in on the borders and in the airports. And then you have Immigration Service, which is the one that's adjudicating all the petitions, the investment petitions, the employment petitions, and the family petitions. And all of them have a mandate to deny visas, to deny entry, and to deny petitions.
So that
right
makes it
now.
very difficult now for families to come into the United States.
It is very difficult. I would say of all the different parts of immigration law, the family one is probably the one that's still easier to get approved because it's hard for them to deny a case when you can clearly prove a family connection
Right.
that meets the test.
Now, I understand reading recently that there is a trend towards being more liberal with regard to granting immigration to highly skilled people with certain kinds of skills, maybe in tech and things like that. Is that true?
That's the rhetoric that we hear
Okay.
from the government, but it's actually not the case.
Oh,
And I have proof of that. Last year, the H-1B visas, which are the ones used by professionals, U.S. employers want to sponsor professionals that have professional degrees. The average denial rate under Obama was about 12%, and last year was somewhere around 75%.
my goodness.
And these are all kids, I call them, that have degrees or master's degrees, a lot of them from U.S. institutions in engineering and all the STEM fields. So I would disagree. The merit-based system is what they purport to be, what they want to do, but in practice, that's not what's
It's
happening.
not happening now. That's interesting. Tell us a little bit about the longer trends in immigration as you see them.
It's really hard to say, Bruce. The one tendency that stayed intact over the years is that Congress is essentially at a standstill. There have not been new laws passed. So what has been happening is the president is able to impose his will based on what's called executive orders. Obama did that to pass something called DACA, which was the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, that was pro-immigrant, and some other pro-immigrant directives that he sought and that he was able to carry out. But Trump is doing the same thing to essentially apply the law the way that he sees fit without changing it. And that allows for arbitrary decisions to be made, which turn into denials.
Oh.
And so that's one trend. It really depends on who our president will be coming up in 2 years, starting in January, in 2 years from now. And then also what happens with Congress if it becomes majority Democratic. My goal and my hope, I guess you could say, is that if it becomes majority Democratic, then we will have a pro-immigrant government. And that could lead to the change in laws, which don't happen now. And a change in law is what could bring amnesty, what could make DACA permanent, what could give people a path to citizenship, and what could really create a merit-based system, which we don't have.
So your crystal ball is not any better than anybody else's when it comes to this issue.
I wish it were, Bruce. It really is not. It's not. All I know is that things are getting progressively more difficult in this 4-year term that we're dealing with.
Right. One of the things that you don't know about this incredible attorney is that he's also an incredible singer. And I wanted to share a clip with you.
There's a path leading out to sea, and from somewhere deep in my mind, sirens sing out loud, songs of doubt as only they know how. But one glance back reminds and I see someone else, not me. I keep looking back at someone else. Me.
Let's return to the topic of immigration. Steve, what are
Yes.
the examples of some of the hardest cases that you've managed, and how did you handle them?
Well, there's, like I talked about the three-headed monster. And so essentially I have to defend and protect my clients on 3 levels. And so there are cases where you might have to fight, for example, a petition to be approved in the US first. So let's say there's a US employer that wants to hire a foreign national, and you get an approved petition for a visa, then they have to go to the US embassy or consulate where they live to get the visa. But what happens when you get a request for evidence? from Immigration Service, or what's called a NOID, a Notice of Intent to Deny. That is happening now at over a 60% clip. In the past, we would get very few of those. So what we have to do is monitor each similar kind of case with similar fact patterns, see what the requests for evidence are asking, and then we have to modify constantly what we do for our future cases in order to stay ahead of immigration to try to get an approval. And I also have to know how to maneuver, how to tell the officer that they've misapplied the law in a way that's not offensive to them, so they will still be able to approve the case. That's step one. Then you have step two at the embassies where they're trying to deny more cases. For example, the F1 student visas are being denied at a much higher clip. I spoke with an officer at Cornell University that said that their enrollment for international students had dropped by 25%. And that's because they're admitting the students, but the students are getting their visas denied. One of the reasons they're denied is what's called lack of sufficient ties to home country. So you have to prepare a packet for them that shows that they have the sufficient ties to their home country in order to qualify for the visa, or they'll get denied, even though they have an approved petition.
Let's go back just a little bit. You were talking about the NOIDs. When you're managing those and you're addressing those, what is your percentage of success of turning those around?
Well, Bruce, you've asked my least favorite question. I hate to pat myself on the back, but our approval rates have been consistently high. I think our approval rates were somewhere around 96% before the Trump administration came in. And since then, quite honestly, I haven't looked at the numbers. They're not going to be as high. But I know that they're higher than much higher than average. The important thing is to be able to know the law well enough to be able to spot where the officer is citing it incorrectly, sometimes on purpose, in order to straighten it out and to make the argument again, so they have no way of denying the case. And that takes a very nuanced argument, but also takes a very thorough understanding of the law.
I see. Venezuela, there's so much unrest there now. Are you finding a lot of cases of people coming into this country, or attempting to at least, from there?
Well, it's a very complicated situation because the U.S. Embassy in Caracas is closed, and it's been so for a while, which means nobody can receive new visas. And you've got this diaspora of Venezuelans, of several millions of people from Venezuela have moved to other parts of South America, Europe, and the U.S. So essentially, people who had tourist visas from Venezuela before the embassy was closed might still be here. And when they come here, you have to find a way to extend their status or to put them on alternative visa statuses, or if they qualify, to get them green cards. Unfortunately, some of them are here now overstayed, or they've come in illegally. And that means that they need to wait for an amnesty, which won't happen under this administration.
I see.
I also would like to mention that since my fiancée is from Venezuela and I've worked with her family, we've started a charity called Correr por Venezuela, or Run for Venezuela, where we're raising funds through athletic events to send much needed supplies to people there because they're really in a really tough spot now.
Well, that's very interesting. Can you give us the contact information for that so that people can, if they want, contribute?
Absolutely. The email is Correr por Venezuela, so CORRER Venezuela @yahoo.com. If they send us information there, we can give them all the info they need if they want to participate in events to raise money or they want to donate. And we have a 501c3 registered charity, so it's deductible.
Oh, great. Okay. So tell us about volume.
I would say if you compared the administrations from the Obama until compared to these last 2 years under the Trump administration, the volume of cases, in other words, the number of applications being filed, is about the same. As I said, the number of denials has gone up precipitously.
Yeah.
But the upside of this is that people are still believing in the American dream. They're still trying. The media gets out there, as you know, 24 hours of media, the news gets anywhere in the world in an instant. And everyone knows that the denials are on the rise and that the policies here have changed, and it's pretty anti-immigrant. But what I've seen, and the encouraging part of that statistic, is that there are still people that are insisting on coming here, on setting up their businesses, on bringing their family here. And so the American dream is still alive.
Speaking about dreams, we're going to have another clip.
I'm a man. Can't you see what I am? I live and I breathe for you. the way I love you. No, 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 you don't know what it's like. You don't know what it's like to love somebody, to love.
If you ever decide not to practice immigration law, you certainly have another career.
I wish that were true, Bruce. My mom wanted me to be a singer, but unfortunately, I realized at one point I had to pay the bills. And luckily, I love what I do, so I'm going to keep doing both.
Having been an ex-rock musician, I get it, paying the bills. It's very important for those interested in immigration into the U.S. to prepare in advance. Please tell us a little bit about foreign entrepreneurs. How should they prepare before they apply?
Sure. I'd say the first part of my answer would be a practical part, which is non-immigration. And there are things that I see when I present overseas that a lot of entrepreneurs who are passionate don't realize that they need to do before they set up their companies here. And as you know, a lot of U.S. companies fail. So can you imagine bringing a company from another country here or starting a brand new startup without knowing the market is a big challenge. So what I always tell them is to first do their research to make sure that there's proper demand for what their service or product is. And then also to not think that they're failing if they don't end up in Silicon Valley or in New York. If you get 0.1% of market share here in certain verticals, you're very, very successful. It's a huge country. So first it's a psychological thing and being prepared. Then when it comes to actually setting up their companies, they need to make sure that they've registered a U.S. company which sponsors the visa, and that they have a bank account that's properly funded. And that means that they have to have the first year operating costs covered, including projected salaries. What we have to remember is that these visas exist for job creation purposes. So they have to make sure that the funding is there before they apply for their visas.
Okay. And of course, I've seen companies that come in and they establish a U.S. subsidiary without the thought to the market, and they fail. Do you have any idea what the percentage of failure rate is on those?
I don't. I know that in New York City, any business, just businesses in general, have essentially approximately a 80% fail rate within 5 years.
Yes.
But a lot of those are service-based and hospitality-based. We work with a lot of tech-based companies that have lower costs when they start. And so I'm happy to say that the majority of my clients are still operating. And that's the most rewarding part of my job, is when I help somebody get here, their dream becomes a reality. And then we have companies that have 20, 30 employees.
Sure, sure. Which are the visas that will apply to entrepreneurs?
There are two main visas, the E2 and the L1. And the important thing to understand about the E2 is that it depends on your nationality. So if you're an investor or an entrepreneur and you have a specific passport or several passports of countries that have a treaty with the United States, and currently there are 81 countries that have a treaty, then you automatically can qualify to set up a U.S. business and apply under E2. If you don't have a passport from one of those countries that are listed, then you go with the L1, and that necessitates having a foreign entity that exists for at least 1 year first before you apply and set up your subsidiary.
Okay. I think we can actually put up a list of all of the requirements for this.
Yeah, I'd like to highlight a few of the preliminary steps that you need if you're expanding your current company into the U.S. through a subsidiary.
Sure.
The first thing, like we talked about, is incorporating. Then you have to set up a U.S. bank account and get a tax ID number. And then you have to properly fund the company in the U.S. Lastly, you have to make sure that you have what's called sufficient physical premises, which means you need an office space and warehouse if you have goods that's big enough to house all your projected employees for the first year. Otherwise, you won't qualify.
Okay. How about investors? How should they prepare?
Investors need to make sure that they can show where their funds are coming from. They have to be completely transparent. There's something for all investment type visas called source of funds. Okay. They have to be able to show that literally every penny of their investment is clear what the source is in order to qualify. And then obviously they need to do their homework and make sure that they're investing in the right investment vehicle or in the right company. And then, like I said, they also need to make sure that it's sufficient or what's called substantial, which means covering first-year operating costs completely. If they don't have those funds, then they can't invest. They won't qualify for the visa. And investing in something without knowing if you qualify based on that investment doesn't make any sense, right?
Of course. Steve, what about temporary visa applicants? What do they require?
The most important thing for them is to show sufficient ties to home country. We talked about the process at the embassies and consulates. No matter which visa they apply for, if it's a tourist visa or a student visa or a work-based visa, they need to show that they have sufficient ties to home country, that they will be returning to not get denied. If it's a work-based visa, they need to have all their qualifications, as well as a copy of the petition that was approved by Immigration Service. They need to show that they have a clean immigration and criminal history. So if they have anything that's ever happened to them in terms of immigration or criminal history, they need the police reports, or they need to be able to explain what happened. And then if they're applying for dependent family members, they need to have clear proof of family ties, blood ties, and also through marriage, marriage certificate if they're bringing their spouse.
Okay, so family-sponsored immigrants, how does that work?
Well, it's kind of a complicated system. It depends if you're doing what's called an adjustment of status within the United States or if you're outside the U.S. And there are different documents and forms required for each process. Essentially, if you have a U.S. family member that's entered the U.S. legally and you're the parent, child, spouse of that individual, then you can sponsor them to adjust and get permanent residence. If not, then you have to go through the consulate or embassy overseas. And there are certain documents that are in common that you would need for both of those processes.
Steve, this has been really helpful. If people want to reach out to you with questions or specific issues that they may have, how can they reach you?
They can email me at smaggi@smalawyers.com, or they can send me a text message or a WhatsApp message at 917-657-1132.
Okay, and any final thoughts you'd like to leave with us?
I would just like to say that for all those people who are dreaming of realizing their version of the American dream, that it's still possible.
Okay. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Bruce.
This has been Bruce Stout for the Maggi Immigration Report. Thank you for joining us.